Flash television series on the CW may have one of the most complicated timelines I have ever seen. The show about DC's fastest man alive is full of so much time travel, alternate universes, and fake science that it would be easier to get a degree in astrophysics than it would to explain this Rorschach test of a timeline. Unfortunately, Harvard didn't respond to my DMs, so y'all stuck with me. Today, in preparation for the show's final season, I'm going to be explaining the current timeline of The Flash up to season 8. And I'm sure it'll go off without a hitch. I did it. I finally lost my mind. I finally lost my mind. Let's get started. Now, I'm not going to go in depth into each season, otherwise this video will be over an hour long. So instead, I'm going to be talking about the major events and any drastic changes that may have happened to the timeline, in which there is a lot of. So we're going to start in the year 2000, 13 years before season 1's main plot. We see an 11-year-old Barry Allen witness his mother be murdered by a yellow blur. His father is framed for the crime, and Barry is taken in by Joe West and his daughter Iris. Barry eventually grows up to be a CSI and hopes to one day prove his father's innocence. Unfortunately, that mission is going to have to be put on hold, as in 2013, Star Labs' particle accelerator explodes, sending out a wave of dark matter throughout the city, and putting Barry to sleep for about 6 months. When he wakes up from his coma, he's introduced to the Star Labs crew, Caitlin Snow, Cisco Ramon, and Harrison Wells, the last of which was the one that actually designed the particle accelerator. We learned that the explosion gave several people in the city superpowers, including Barry, leading him to become the Flash. Also, it turns out that Harrison Wells is faking his disability, and besides the fact that he probably shouldn't be allowed to park in the handicap spot anymore, we are shown a newspaper from 2024. This single piece of paper is probably responsible for screwing up at least half the timeline, but we'll put a pin in it for now. Just remember the headline, 2024, The Flash vanishes in crisis. Okay, so now we're on our first instance of time travel. Yeah, it didn't take very long. So, Weather Wizard sends a tsunami to destroy the city, and in the process of trying to stop it, Barry accidentally runs backwards in time. Even though he only ran back like a day, several major events just don't happen anymore. Wells doesn't reveal himself as the villain, the Reverse Flash to Cisco, which would have led to his death, and Barry hasn't tried to kiss his adoptive sister Iris yet. Which, for the record, is weird. The concept of Barry and Iris just within the Flash universe, to where he's pretty much adopted by the West family, to the point where he's calling Joe dad. It's bizarre. It's one thing if they weren't living in the same house, they were just like childhood friends who grew up together, like that's fine. Bro, you lived with this girl. She's practically your sister in everything but name. Like, I don't know where Central City is on the US map, but if it was close to Alabama, wouldn't be surprised. Also, enjoy the simplicity of this timeline because it's going to get out of hand really quick. Anyway, let's wrap up season 1. Harrison Wells is eventually revealed to be a man named Eobard Thawne, aka the Reverse Flash, who is Barry's arch enemy from the future, who has such a hard-on for making Barry's life miserable that he was the one that went back in time to kill his mother. However, this causes him to not have enough speed to get back to the future. So he sucks the nutrients out of the original Harrison Wells, harder than Mia Malkova, and steals his face. Back to the present, Thawne fights Barry, loses, but offers a proposition. Help him get back to the future, and in return, Barry will have the opportunity to go back in time and save his mother. Barry initially agrees and does travel back in time, however, has a change of heart, and instead decides to go stop Thawne in the present. And just when it looks like that Thawne is going to kill Barry, Eddie Thawne, who is Eobard's ancestor, kills himself, making it so that Thawne is never born. Anyway, with a black hole opening up above Central City, that is where we end season 1. A bit of a long explanation, but we have to make sure that everything is set up before we get into the really crazy stuff. The black hole is destroyed thanks to Caitlin's husband's sacrifice, but in return, it opens up several portals to different Earths. That's right, we're being introduced to the concept of the multiverse this season. Alternate universes that are similar to ours with some key differences, but those aren't really important to this video. Unless you want me to make a video that talks about the entire multiverse of the Arrowverse, but just keep in mind that if you want that, I only respond to video requests based on subscribes, likes, and comments. Purely just based on that, so keep it in mind. Anyway, we meet an alternate version of Harrison Wells, a new mentor in G.I.Gio, Joe West's son Wally, and our new villain, Zoom. Zoom is actually sending metas from Earth 2 to fight Barry, but in the midst of this, the Reverse Flash returns. How, you may ask? Well, the show explains it like this. Basically, this version of Thawne has yet to go back in time and kill Barry's mother, and at some point was waiting in the Speed Force, keeping himself and his timeline intact, creating a time remnant. Meaning that this Thawne is from an alternate future that is somehow still intact and one that he is able to travel back and forth to, making this point in time his origin story, where he ends up meeting all the members of Team Flash and knows the time period where the Flash is from. If that explanation leaves you with more questions than answers, well then get used to it, because that is going to become a running theme. Anyway, Thawne ends up going back to the future, so the timeline is still intact. But not for long, because after the team learns that G.I.Gio was actually Zoom, Barry ends up going back in time to 2014 to figure out how to get faster from Thawne. Due to this action of going back in time, a villain, Hartley Rathaway, ends up having a change of heart and is now a good guy in this new timeline. So some bigger changes, but nothing crazy yet. We are also introduced to time wraiths. They're basically the Speed Force's hull monitors, who aren't a fan when speedsters carelessly travel through time. Why didn't the creatures come after Barry when he accidentally time traveled in season 1?
This isn't the first time I've time traveled. How come I've never seen one of these until now? Because you ran out of luck.
So basically they work whenever the writers want them to. That is just terrible writing. Like, when you have these creatures that are pretty much here to make sure that the speedsters are properly nerfed, the rules need to be clear and concise and consistent. But by having this basically, oh, whenever I want to approach, it gives it no stakes. It doesn't make them an actual threat to the audience or to our protagonists. It's a mess. Time wraiths have been mishandled all throughout the show. That actually reminds me, we kind of glanced over the fact that Jay was Zoom at the same time. Basically, Zoom went back in time to talk to his past self, creating a time remnant. He then got his remnant to agree to let Zoom kill him to motivate Barry to go faster. This makes no f***ing sense. Zoom went back in time so he can kill his past self, yet somehow doesn't disappear from existence. All these writers had to do was establish that it was Zoom's future self that dies. That way, it would make at least a little more sense than just throwing your hands in the air and saying, screw it, time remnants, paradoxes, that's our solution to everything. God. Anyway, this apparently fits the criteria to get inappropriately touched by a time wraith, because when Zoom and Barry have their final battle, Barry creates a time remnant to lure out the wraiths, and they end up basically killing Zoom. The day is saved, but after getting both his parents clapped, oh yeah, somewhere here, Zoom killed Barry's dad. Not really that important, but anyway, because of that, Barry decides, screw the consequences, and goes back in time to save his mother, leading us to season 3, where everything goes to hell. Now that Barry has changed the past, everything we just talked about is pointless. Everything is different now in this new timeline the show calls Flashpoint. Wally West is now Kid Flash, Cisco is rich, Caitlin is a child doctor who doesn't have severe emotional damage. Okay, you know what? Maybe for the most part this timeline is kind of an improvement. But wait, Barry's starting to lose his memories because the timeline is settling, and we can't have that. So he erases Flashpoint by letting Thawne go back and kill his mother. However, rather than fixing everything, this action actually creates a new timeline where Cisco's brother is dead, Iris and Joe are at odds, a bunch of people are now becoming metas that they were in Flashpoint, and Caitlin now has evil ice powers. So, this is now what the current timeline looks like, and yeah, it's a mess, but it can't get worse, right?
So stupid.
Anyway, we are introduced to Dr. Alchemy. He is the one who is making all these metas from Flashpoint, and was believed to be the main antagonist. But psych, he was actually just a fancy priest who worships the god of speed, Savitar. After this Decepticon reject is revealed, Team Flash quickly imprisons his essence inside a box in the Speed Force. But this action sends Barry months into the future, where he sees that Savitar ends up killing Iris. Not only does this confirm that Savitar ends up escaping the Speed Force, But remember the newspaper from 2024? Well, it's back again because it used to be written by Iris West Allen, but now some random twat is writing it. So now the goal for the rest of the season is to stop Iris's death by changing as many little things leading up to it as possible. On top of that, Barry decides, like an actual rational human being, that the best way to stop Iris from dying is to figure out how they stop Savitar in the future, or at least who he is. So Barry runs to 2024 and comes back with enough knowledge to piece together Savitar's identity. So after all this time, Savitar's identity is revealed to be an alternate version of Barry Allen. What? Okay, the way the show explains it is like this. In the future, Barry will make time remnants to help stop Savitar. But Savitar will kill all but one of the duplicates. That duplicate will, for some reason, be shunned by the rest of Team Flash. And out of his anger, will end up going to the beginning of time and creating the myth of Savitar, which will eventually lead to his creation and end up leaving us with this absolute crap show of a timeline.
That doesn't make any sense. Which came first, Savitar or Time Remnant?
It's a closed loop. No beginning, no end. It's just one endless cycle.
Now, here is why that explanation is bullshit. Because all Barry would have to do to fix this, right, is to run to the future and tell his future self to not make any time remnants. This would break the loop of Savitar constantly being created and then going back to kill Iris and constantly making his creation. But wait, you may be saying, remember this line?
See, that's the thing about time travel, Barry. The more you do it, the less the rules apply to you.
Well, that line is actually a lie. You have been lied to. Because in that same episode where the line is said, Team Flash makes a device that prevents Barry from making any new memories. And while the device does backfire, it still ends up affecting Savitar. So this officially makes fuck all sense. I think this is officially where the Flash has jumped the shark, as the explanations for this is so bonkers and flies in the face of so many basic questions. Like, why would an alternate version of Barry do this if he has the same memories as the original? Like, can we just agree that at this point, this timeline makes no sense? Nothing here is coherent. We agree? Great. Anyway, we're on the last 2 episodes, and oh shit, Iris dies, but psych, it was actually this season's Harrison Wells disguised as Iris, because we always needed an alternate version of Harrison Wells, so Savitar is now being erased from the timeline. In order to save himself, Savitar tries to spread his consciousness throughout time, but Team Flash stops him, Iris busts a cap in his ass, and just when we think that the day is saved, the Speed Force ends up having a conniption all over Central City that could lead to his destruction. The only way to stop this is by Barry sacrificing himself by going into the Speed Force. So he says his goodbyes and goes into the Speed Force, saving the city and ending this mess of Season 3. Oh my god, that was painful. Luckily, Season 4 doesn't perform any deprived sex acts on the timeline, so this section should go by pretty fast. Season starts with the team pulling Barry out of the Speed Force, but in doing so creates a handful of new metas that end up terrorizing the city. God, this show is really just Team Flash cleaning up their own messes. Like, they create half of the villains that are on the show. Anyway, we are introduced to Ralph Dibny, who will eventually be cancelled, become the elongated man. Cisco is now a full-time superhero, Caitlin no longer wants to kill them, and Iris and Barry finally get married. Oh, and a bunch of people that would get me demonetized if I say their name ambush the wedding, and one of their leaders is revealed to be the Reverse Flash. Was this well explained?
Time travel, Barry. So very confusing. I always seem to be saying that to you, don't I?
I didn't think so, so we'll address that later. Now during all this, we learned that everything from Team Flash being forced to pull Barry out of the Speed Force to the new metas being created was all part of this season's villain's plan, that being Clifford DeVoe, aka the Thinker. He was born the night of the particle accelerator, big shock, and is so intelligent he could basically do the Doctor Strange 1 million possibility things in his head on command. Devoe's evil plan is that he wants to reset the human brain so that everyone wouldn't be so distracted and he'll be able to reteach the world. Clearly, no red flags whatsoever with that mindset. Anyway, to do this, Devoe needs to use several satellites to release this brain fry signal. Team Flash does eventually defeat him, but not without setting off a dead man switch, sending down the satellites to destroy the city. So, Barry has to build up enough momentum to punch the satellite because whenever there's a problem, the solution is just run faster. But wait, time rewind, that's right, we're not out of the woods just yet. Now there's a second speedster running with Barry to help him destroy the satellite. We later learn that the speedster's name is Nora West Allen, Barry and Iris's daughter from the future. Okay, season 5. From this point forward, there are no breaks. This timeline is about to get beat up harder than an altar boy's dick when he's around a priest. So while Nora is here, we learned some very important information about Barry's future. That being that remember that newspaper from 2024? Well, Nora shows Barry that he never comes back from Crisis, meaning she never knew her father. For some reason, this gives Barry enough justification to not send her back to the future because consequences be damned. But I am sure that this will have no issues with the timeline. So because Nora messed with the timeline, our villain for this season is a metahuman serial killer named Cicada. He was created when a shard from Devoe's satellite impaled him. According to Nora, in the future, Team Flash will never catch him. However, he has appeared early in this timeline because clearly Nora wasn't punished severely enough growing up. Also, Cicada has a dagger that neutralizes meta powers. So clearly for a team that is full of metahumans, it's gonna be hard for Team Flash to take him down. So Nora convinces Barry to go back in time 3 different points to make a device that will shut down the dagger. Does nobody learn anything? Okay, so the 3 points these two dip tits need to go to is 2017 for a piece of Savitar's armor, 2016 for the transmitter Zoom used to steal Barry's speed, and the particle accelerator explosion in 2014 for the explosion of dark matter. And apparently everything they need is insignificant to the grander timeline, so there should be no timeline splits here. Unless you get caught. Yeah, while getting a piece of Savitar's suit was no problem, when Barry and Nora go back to 2016, they end up being spotted by Zoom, who proceeds to chase them down, only to be stopped by a time wraith. Now, if this doesn't create another split, I don't know what does. Zoom now has knowledge that Barry may still have speed, or at least he knows it's a future version of him, meaning his plan to destroy the multiverse would fail. Wouldn't that affect season 2 in some way? And don't get me started if that time wraith actually managed to kill him. So even though the show doesn't say so, I'm adding another split to the timeline. Why? Because f*** you, that's why. Anyway, after these two finish diddling the timeline and blundering the capture of Cicada, Nora looks back. She takes a good look at this timeline and says, you know what? I want some one-on-one time with this one. And proceeds in episode 14 to run back in time and change the timeline 52 times. What? Okay, just imagine that this is 52 breaks. Oh, by the way, there are 2 cicadas now. Is that important to the grand scheme of things? No. Or at least not as important as Team Flash learning that Nora was working with Eobard Thawne, who is imprisoned in the future. Now, how was he alive when he was erased from the timeline in season 1 and in season 3? Yes, Barry did eventually bring him back to kill his mother, but that Thawne is now the only version of Thawne in that timeline. So he has to be the one that kills the original Harrison Wells, build the particle accelerator, and basically create the show. Oh, but he was in Crisis on Earth X the last time we saw him. Well, remember this line again?
Time travel, Barry. Confusing. I always seem to be saying that to you.
Yeah, this show hasn't really given the best of explanations. God, this timeline, bro. Anyway, we actually finally get Nora's origin story and an idea of the future that she inhabits. She's a CSI. Iris put a meta-dampening chip in her to suppress her powers, eventually unlocks said powers by getting in contact with a speedster named Godspeed, who, don't worry, will show up later, and she eventually goes to Thawne in prison as she has no one else to teach her the way to be a speedster. Thawne then teaches Nora how to manipulate the timeline so she won't create another Flashpoint, and then she goes back in time, and we get season 5. Alright, you got all that? Great. Now forget all of it, because after some family drama and a fight with Cicada, Team Flash finally managed to destroy the dagger. However, that is exactly what Thawne's plan was, as the dagger is what was suppressing his speed in the future. Because you know, meta-dampeners aren't a thing anymore, or haven't seen any advancements whatsoever. It's not like in Season 4, we had an entire prison wing just for metas. Anyway, Thawne escapes, and apparently this change of destroying the dagger was big enough to erase this version of Nora from the timeline. You know, not the fact that she just interacted with her parents that could change her time of conception and her age, but you know, not the fact that she was interacting with her parents this entire season and that could actually drastically change her time of conception and her age as a whole, but we're gonna forget about that because there is actually a bigger change. One last time, we're going to bring up that newspaper. Remember that 2024 newspaper, The Flash Vanishes in Crisis? Well, now the time has jumped back to 2019, meaning Crisis is just around the corner. Season 6. We're almost done. Nothing really crazy happens before the big crossover, so we're just going to fast forward right to Crisis. It's finally time for Barry to make the ultimate sacrifice to save the multiverse. He says his final goodbyes, and psych! It was actually an alternate universe version of The Flash that saves the multiverse. Because why would this show follow through on something that was set up in the pilot? I mean, it's not like that is the most basic rules of setup and payoff that is taught in any writing class and is a concept that can be understood by kids in f***ing elementary school. But then again, this show doesn't know how to spell risks, let alone take them. So what is the main takeaway from Crisis? Well, the multiverse as we know it from Season 2 is dead, all merged into one universe with no doppelgangers called Earth Prime. God, that's good. Meaning that this entire timeline that we just discussed is f***ing pointless. Why is this? Because at any time, if something doesn't make sense, the writers can just go, oh, it's because of Crisis. Says, oh, Crisis is the reason that happened. Oh, this is a Crisis problem. Crisis, Crisis, Crisis. Dear God, I'm gonna have a mental crisis. So how does this work now that Supergirl, Superman, and Martian Manhunter have all been inhabiting this Earth the entire time? I don't know. Nobody knows. Or what about the Harrison Welleses? Or no, better yet, what about Season 2 as a whole, whose entire season revolves around the concept of the multiverse that doesn't exist in this timeline anymore? It's so unbelievably f***ed. The world building is f***ed. Where were we? Oh, yeah. The Speed Force died because of Crisis, so now all the speedsters are losing their powers. Thawne's negative Speed Force is now all across time, and Iris is stuck in the mirror dimension. Look, do you really care about that? Genuinely, do you really care about it? Didn't think so. Season 7. Now, this is where the new format for The Flash went into full swing. For those of you who don't know, Eric Wallace, who has been the showrunner of The Flash since Season 6, introduced a new way to structure each story. They're called graphic novels, and they're basically mini arcs throughout the season with some interludes in between, which are basically a fancy word for filler. What this means for the rest of the timeline is that there isn't really a lot of the major events to cover, as this new style doesn't hold the same impact as what the show had when it was just doing the singular arc throughout the season. So as a result, that should mean that there's a lot less time screwing up, right? Right? Anyway, thanks to the sacrifice of another version of Harrison Wells, I mean the Power of Love, Team Flash was able to make an artificial Speed Force, so Barry can keep his powers. However, this does end up creating 3 other forces of nature: the Strength Force, the Sage Force, and the Still Force. They'll get into a little conflict, but it isn't really important, so let's fast forward to the Godspeed arc. Godspeed is a speedster from the future who is hunting for natural speed, as he was created through artificial means. And we also get the return of Nora. And thanks to all the timeline fingering, her new brother Bart Allen. They have come to the past from 2042 to help Barry with Godspeed. And because clearly, even with Barry being a more active father in the future, these kids weren't punished severely enough. But you know who else comes to help Barry? Jay Garrick, the Flash from Earth 3, also known as the doppelganger of Barry's father. Yeah, he is in this timeline, even though Crisis established that there are no more doppelgangers. Again, what the f*** is this timeline now? What is it? Jay has been around this entire time, but he's an alternate version of Henry Allen? Was he the first speedster? I don't know, you don't know, and I bet the writers don't even know. Okay, last thing to bring up for season 7. Besides the fact that Iris has this time sickness that has her coming in and out of time, look, it doesn't matter. The writers don't give a f*** about this plot point, so why the hell should I? Anyway, the real important thing is that in order to defeat Godspeed, Barry convinces the Speed Force to bring Thawne back to life. So, while Godspeed is defeated, Thawne is back, and just in time to mess up the timeline more with Armageddon. Okay, come on. Last season. Alright, so season 8 starts off with the crossover event Armageddon, which quickly devolves into a mess. Basically, in 2031, the Flash apparently ends up destroying the world, so an alien named Despero goes back in time in order to kill Barry. Throughout the first 3 episodes of the crossover, it seems that Barry is going insane, as he's forgetting some major events like the fact that Joe died off screen. But wouldn't you know that it was Thawne all along, creating a Reverse Flashpoint. God, I need a drink. Okay, Reverse Flashpoint. Same concept as the one from season 3. Thawne ran back in time and changed enough major events to where the timeline is now completely different. Specifically, 3 points in time. 2021, he pretended to be the Flash, created doubt within the city, was the one who killed Joe, got Star Labs shut down, and just everything bad that has happened so far in the crossover. He then made a trip to 2013, where he made it so that he was the one that was struck by lightning and became the Flash, while at the same time making Barry the Reverse Flash in this new timeline. How? Nobody knows. Lastly, he went to the year 2000 and finally killed Barry when he was a child, so now he's fading from existence. Not only is this plan a mess, but it's goddamn pointless. All Thawne really has to do is go back to the year 2000 and kill Barry, or even in 2013 and become the Flash. There's no reason to go to 2021 and draw attention to yourself. But even then, Thawne should have won, because Barry should have never known about the timeline being different, because he didn't travel with Thawne to make the change. That is the only reason why back in season 3 with Flashpoint, they both still had their memories intact of the old timeline. But even then, that was eventually getting changed as the timeline was settling. Remember this clip?
Your speed! The more you use it, the faster you lose your memories.
Speedsters are still affected by changes in the timeline, unless they did the time travel or are hiding in the Speed Force, which Barry wasn't doing either of. This is further confirmed in the episode immediately following Armageddon. Apparently last season with Bart and Nora shenanigans, it ended up messing with the timeline a bit. And it affected Jay Garrick, a speedster who also spent time in the Speed Force back in season 3. You know what? No. Fuck Armageddon. This ended up getting erased from the timeline anyway, so it could burn in hell for all I care. The only important thing is that now we finally have some more expansion on Thawne's backstory. That being 200 years into the future, Thawne recreated the event that gave Barry his powers because he admired the Flash. However, when he was about to unveil himself to the world, Barry came from the future, because he still doesn't learn his lesson, and saved the crowd that was meant for Thawne. He felt humiliated, and from that point on, dedicated his life to making Barry's miserable. This backstory is not only very stupid and doesn't line up with the calculated man we know Thawne is, but it also contradicts season 2's backstory for Thawne.
This ability to travel through time revealed the truth. My fate was to become your greatest enemy. I was never going to be the Flash, so I became the reverse of everything that you were.
I did it. I finally lost my mind. I finally lost my mind. Okay, anyway. Armageddon ends, and we have an episode after the fact of Bart and Nora fixing their timeline that they screwed up by going back in time last season. Apparently this doesn't change the timeline too drastically, and you know what? We're just going to ignore the fact that these two exposed Central City to metahumans months before they were supposed to, just to save my sanity. Let's just agree that CCPD and the press are just incompetent, and move on from there. So we get a little break from the timeline beating, and within that time, Iris's time sickness starts back up again, causing her to pop in and out of time. We were also introduced to the negative forces, who are basically like the forces from season 7, but crankier. They're actually the ones responsible for Iris's time sickness and are looking for a new avatar for their powers. But they can't have one because guess what? Thawne is back. No, not that Thawne, but rather a version of Thawne from before he becomes the Reverse Flash. How is this possible? Well, the show says that when Barry let Thawne kill his mother during Flashpoint, that now there's a second Thawne running around. Look, I know we debunked it already, but just go with it. He had a little spat with the Legends, was killed, revived, was then forced to watch one fixed point in time, died again, and then got revived into this new life. Confusing? Well, it doesn't matter, because he is killed in order to give the Harrison Wells looking Thawne his speed back. How the fuck do I put this on the timeline? You know what? Screw it. We're done. The season ends with Barry defeating a roided up Reverse Flash and a teaser that next season's villain will also be from the future. So we're still not even done with these fucking splits. But there it is. That is the Flash's full timeline before season 9. Does it make sense? No. The fact that this looks more like a bunch of stick figures having an orgy rather than an actual timeline is actually astounding to me. And you wanna know why? It's because the show has no consistent rules to follow. I mean, when it comes to all the fake science on the show, a lack of consistency may harm it, but when your lack of rules results in this bukkake on the board behind me is where I draw the line. But, did I have fun? No, this was a very painful experience. I am sweating profusely, and I regret every decision that led me to this point. But, this does mean I don't have to talk about The Flash anymore until season 9.
Wait, what about your video on season 8?
What's that? What do you mean? No, I don't need to make a video about season 8. Wait, this is it. This is it. I covered what I felt about season 8. It's
No, we want a 30-minute long video.
This isn't enough?
I felt kind of mid on
Not
that.
really.
Are you not entertained? Alright, fine, screw it. We're gonna have a filler video in between, but then after that, we will talk about The Flash season 8. Why? Because y'all love to watch me suffer. This.